This webinar was recorded for subrecipients of the Tennessee Strong Families Grant on January 28, 2026. Rebecca Stevens, Domestic Violence Child Welfare Liaison, was our subject matter expert presenter. The session clarified key domestic violence concepts by unpacking myths, confusing terms, and language that impacts care. Participants also learned to recognize and respond to DV during pregnancy by using clinical signs, screening tools, and trauma-informed inquiry. The slides and reference materials are posted on our webpage for your reference and review.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you are here. So this is the hardest part for me. It's like when you go for an interview and they ask you what your strengths are, I get all nervous. So who am I? My name is Becky Stevens, and I come to this work not only as a professional, as a woman, a mother, a daughter, a survivor, and a victim services provider. And these roles have shaped how I see families and the importance of safety and the value of people. I serve as the Child Welfare Domestic Violence Liaison across McMinn, Meigs, and Monroe County through my home agency called the Hope Center. So the Hope Center provides services for victims of domestic violence, adult sexual assault in their separate, distinct programs, and child sex abuse through our Children's Advocacy Center. For the past 9 years, this has been my work in both Tennessee and Georgia, and I'm very passionate about it. And I had to put this in there that, yes, I'm a very proud Vols fan. It's my reminder that in heavy work that we do, joy and community matter. So let's go ahead and dive in. So here's where we're headed today. We're going to start with language because words shape how we understand and respond, right? Misused terms can lead to misdisclosures or mislabeling. The language that we use can foster trust and reduce shame for our pregnant survivors. Then we're going to move into recognizing and responding to domestic violence. In pregnancy and beyond, pregnant survivors face unique risks, and we're going to explore how to recognize red flags, to screen with care, and respond in ways that are trauma-informed and survivor-centered. From there, we're going to look at building a screening program, referral pathways, and collaboration. Finally, we're going to close with provider care because sustaining ourselves is essential to sustaining our families. And like has been mentioned already, some of these topics may feel heavy, but we're going to try our best to balance practical tools with reflection and care. All right, well, I hope that this feels a little bit challenging, but also a little familiar because you guys have already been doing this work. So we're just going to build on top of that and give you confidence to go back tomorrow, maybe add some things, maybe change your mindset. And like I said, we're going to start today with language. That language not only impacts the things that we talked about previously, but perception, policy, and our day-to-day practice. So missed terms can minimize survivor experiences or even reinforce harmful myths. And we're going to start out with two terms that are used interchangeably a lot. But for today, I felt like it was important to go ahead and try to distinguish between the two of those. And that is intimate partner violence, IPV, and domestic violence. So, intimate partner violence, or IVP, is a narrow term and it refers to abuse between current or former romantic partners, whereas domestic violence has a much broader definition. And the abuse is within a household or a family system. So, this means that it could be your spouse, could be your mother-in-law, or an uncle, a grandparent. And it is intentionally broad definition that encompasses various forms of abuse, including physical, emotional, sexual, and economic, which intimate partner violence includes those abuses as well. But today we're going to use the term domestic violence and view our clients with this domestic violence lens, because using domestic violence, it may help the public and our clients recognize that abuse isn't just limited to romantic relationships. Also, what terms that we use can impact what services that maybe our pregnant individuals can receive. So, if you have a shelter that only serves intimate partner violence, then they may be able to get shelter. But if it's domestic violence from a mother or a father, then they're not going to be able to get shelter. So, I prefer that term whenever we're trying to get services. It opens up services for a lot more people. Maybe it might even be that if we don't use that term, we're excluding individuals that maybe there's dating violence or a non-cohabitating partner, so they can be excluded. All right, so now that we've defined domestic violence and we know that we're going to be using that term and that it can be crucial in care, let's look at who the players are in domestic violence. Who can be a perpetrator or abuser and who is a victim? So in Tennessee Code, annotated 363-601, for anybody that wants to look that up later, the perpetrator and the victim must share one of the following relationships. They have to be a current or former spouse, people who live together or have lived together, people who are dating or have dated, people who have a child in common, or an adult or minor family member, like we said, a parent, child, sibling, grandparent, or step relative even. And this means that not all acts of violence qualify as domestic violence under Tennessee law, right? The relationship between the parties is key. So then it brings us to what is abuse? It's any action that intentionally causes harm or trauma to another living thing. And I want us to note that when we're talking about a victim of abuse during pregnancy, and like we said before, pregnancy and beyond, we're talking about the time period during pregnancy and within the first year after delivery. I just worked with a mom who disclosed that the first incident of physical abuse happened when her baby was 3 weeks old. She was holding her baby and her partner attacked her. And here we are 14 years later. I'm very sad to say that we're trying some intervention. So that tells me that you guys are on the front lines, right? You're there at the very beginning. So, what about using the term survivor or victim? To me, this is the language of empowerment, and it's often used interchangeably, right? So the term victim can highlight the injustice and the legal recognition of the abuse that has happened. And this individual may have just left an abusive relationship or may even still currently be in one. Maybe they haven't begun their healing journey. That's kind of how I think about that. And then the term survivor, it can relay resilience and agency to the person. This individual may have started or even completed a healing journey. But for today, the best practice is to mirror the language that the individual uses. This is their story. Um, so that's important because everything that we do in this work needs to center on that survivor. So I do want us to take a minute and talk about some common beliefs that people have about domestic violence. And I'm just wondering if you guys are in the position where you could give a thumbs up if you think that this is a true statement, or a thumbs down if you think that it is a false statement. Just to be able to touch on some beliefs that can harm our work. So, domestic violence only occurs in certain socioeconomic groups. Do you think that's true or do you think that's false? So in reality, it can happen in any demographic, regardless of income, education, or background. Domestic violence does not care at all. So how about this one? Domestic violence is only physical. True or false? That also is going to be false. It can include emotional, psychological and financial abuse, and some other tactics that we're going to be able to talk about a little bit later on. So, how about this one? Victims can easily leave their abuser. And that also, it's going to be false. Many factors, including fear and financial dependence, can make it difficult for our victims to leave. We know 7 to 10 times. I just spoke with someone last night. She said, well, I've left 4 different times. So now people don't take me seriously. And she's worried about going to court. And I said, well, we know that it takes 7 to 10 times for a person to leave sometimes. And of course, it can take even more than that or less, but we just want to keep in mind that it's not easy for a person to leave. Alcohol or drugs are the main cause of domestic violence. True or false? It's going to be false. While substance abuse can exasperate the violence, bring it out, it is not the root cause. And this is probably one of my favorite things that I hear. So, domestic violence is a private issue. We deal with it only in the family, right? We don't talk about it. True or false? It's false. It is not a private issue. It is a societal issue and it affects everyone, whole communities, and we need to be addressing it publicly, just like this. And after you guys leave today, hopefully you'll be having these conversations at work and with individuals that you spend time with. And then we have this one. Most times, domestic violence isn't that serious. True or false? And these are going to have to cause us, to check some of our own biases, right? Whenever we're dealing with people. So it's false. And this belief minimizes abuse and contributes to the belief that a survivor might have about nobody believing them whenever we say these things. So all of these, they were false. They're myths, and they contribute to the misunderstanding of domestic violence, and they can hinder support for victims. And I am curious if you guys have heard any other types of myths or phrases that are confusing. If y'all put those in the chat, then maybe we can look at those if we have time at the very end. Okay, so that's the housekeeping, right? I feel like we just needed to get ourselves set up to be able to have this conversation. So we're going to jump in. Domestic violence during pregnancy is more common than you might realize. And I know Daryl's in here and she said that right before this meeting started. And I was like, yes, 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 it is. It is very common. Studies show that 1 in 6 pregnant women experience some sort of violence. And that number is probably very underreported because domestic violence in general is underreported. And for many survivors, pregnancy is a time of increased vulnerability, but it's also a critical window for intervention. So, again, I'll say you all are on the front lines. So, let's pause here for a second because these numbers are not just statistics, they represent lives lost or families shattered, and even warning signs that have been missed. So, almost half of homicides to women who were pregnant or within 1 year of pregnancy have been found to involve domestic violence. And how about this alarming statistics? 77% of pregnant homicide victims are killed in their first trimester. So often that is before prenatal care has even began or before providers have had the opportunity to build trust with a patient. And it supports data that shows that if there is abuse during pregnancy, it's usually been an ongoing issue. Depression, smoking, and marijuana use was more than twice as common among those who experienced violence during pregnancy compared with those who did not. And these are not just behavioral risks, right? They could be trauma responses. And that's the lens and the thoughts that we're going to try to take home with us. So this is also why every provider in this training has the power to shift the trajectory of a family story. You are going to know what to look for and how to respond accordingly. I'm hoping that's the whole purpose of this, right? So I hope. Abuse during pregnancy impacts not just the pregnant person, but also the developing fetus and after birth, the infant. So we're going to look at common tactics of abuse, the psychological and emotional impacts, and how we can respond with care and clarity. The root of domestic violence is a pattern of power and control and harm, right? That shows up in many ways. During pregnancy, it often escalates or shifts in form. Some abusers, perpetrators, may begin to avoid the visible injuries that you might expect, but increase psychological control or use reproductive coercion tactics. Others might target the pregnancy itself by focusing on the abdomen or causing harm to breast or vaginal area. And we're going to take a deeper look at some of these common tactics, such as physical abuse, right? That's what we think of a lot of times when we hear the term domestic violence. We visualize that black eye or that bloody nose. But usually, this is not the first thing that we see in an abusive relationship. It's just the thing that we notice, right? There are less recognizable forms of abuse that we really need to be talking about as well. One of those would be reproductive coercion. That might be hiding or destroying or refusing condoms or birth control, pressuring your survivor to become pregnant or to terminate a pregnancy. Maybe it's threatening to leave or harm them or their children if their reproductive choices aren't followed. Then we have emotional abuse. So that's name calling, mocking, or belittling somebody. And we often hear the terms emotional abuse interchanged with the term psychological abuse, right? The two often overlap, but they operate on slightly different mechanisms. So psychological abuse to me might be more like gaslighting or manipulation. So it might denying your reality. That never happened. You're imagining things. Twisting the facts so that you doubt your memory or judgment. A great way to remember the difference is that emotional abuse targets a person's feelings. You're fat, you're stupid, you're dumb, and self-worth, right? While psychological abuse manipulates their thoughts, perception, mental stability. We might see financial control and isolation. Maybe there's stalking and surveillance. Maybe a client comes in, a patient, and shares that her partner tracks her phone location and demands immediate responses to text, right? Limiting her freedom of movement. That might be a part of all of that. Threats to harm the baby or to harm other children. And it might be that they're threatening to take custody of the baby or report that person to child welfare, using children to manipulate or control the survivor. Our role as providers is to recognize these patterns and to respond without judgment. And I'm also curious about this, so you guys can put that in the chat too. Are there certain tactics that you guys see in your work with pregnant individuals that are more common than others, or that I might have even missed, or that you guys even want to talk about a little bit deeper? Put those in the chat for us too. We're going to educate each other, right? Because I'm going to take those and I'm going back and I'm going to say, oh, look, maybe we need to talk about this more. Always growing, always learning. That's the important thing.
I think one that we talked about in an earlier intimate partner violence webinar that we did a few years ago was that there can be a really blurry line for this population for the control of finances, even like with women being able to get a job, right? And so, like, it's like a partner will be like, well, you're pregnant, you can't work, or you need to stay home with baby, you can't work. And that is like a different type of financial isolation, which is one that can get very confusing on, what's going on.
Yes. Yes, it can. But that would, of course, like you said, that's financial abuse, right? If that individual wants to be able to work and they're not allowed to, that could be a form of isolation. It could be that financial abuse. Yes. And thank you for that, because we're actually going to talk about that with Miss Maria here in a little bit. So thank you. I left this one off of the previous slide because I wanted us to spend just a minute to talk about it. So, a pregnant individual, patient, client confides to you that during an argument, her partner grabbed her throat for a few seconds. She laughs it off. It wasn't a big deal, but she now has trouble swallowing or feels lightheaded, right? Because you're here today Well, and also because you're probably in the medical field, you're going to already, you recognize it as strangulation, right? One of the most dangerous forms of domestic violence. And it's very common that a survivor might minimize it, saying, I hear things like, he just put his hands on my neck. Um, I don't really understand the reason why, but I do hear that a lot that they minimize it. Maybe it's just such a horrific thing for a person to even think that another person could do that to them, that that's what happens. But even brief strangulation can cause lasting neurological damage or death to both the pregnant individual and to the fetus. So, strangulation is actually a high risk flag for lethality in domestic violence assessments, and it can include using hands or objects to restrict another person's breathing. You might hear somebody say, he choked me, or maybe they just say, we were fighting, and the next thing I know, I blacked out, or I saw stars. We have to listen. And Darl always tells us, be curious, like, well, what happened? Those types of things. We have to be curious. And we have to listen for that language because our individuals that we're working with, a lot of times they don't know to say, yeah, he strangled me. Or maybe they just don't even know what happened. They really did black out. And then you're the one that's going to be able to say, oh, well, maybe we need to look into this. Here are some of the signs and the symptoms that we would look for at our shelter. There might be loss of memory, coughing, trouble swallowing, or talking, like maybe they're hoarse. That petechia around, the little dots in the eye, that might be something that we're going to look for. What we have to remember, though, is that even in fatal cases, there are often no outward signs. So we start by believing, right? We recognize the signs, we be curious about what's happened, and then we initiate immediate safety planning and medical referrals if that's needed. So domestic violence in general does not have to be reported to law enforcement in Tennessee. It's up to the survivor. They can press charges, but it's not mandatory. However, healthcare providers do have to report strangulation. So we want to keep that in mind. And this is, in my opinion, it's because it is attempted murder, right? We always say just because somebody didn't succeed whenever they tried to strangle you doesn't mean that they didn't try. In the work of domestic violence, y'all, if you've worked in it for very long, you know we love our wheels. We have a wheel for everything. So this is the wheel of power and control. And remember, that's the root of domestic violence, right? So this wheel illustrates how power and control operate within an abusive relationship. Each segment, the little segments there, represent a tactic used to dominate and isolate a survivor. Notice that the physical and sexual violence is the outer rim here. So very often it reinforces the inner tactics, but it isn't the only form of harm. During pregnancy, some of these tactics, like using children or reproductive coercion or economic abuse, can intensify. And the wheel helps us to shift from seeing this domestic violence as incident based to understanding it as a pattern so that you can help your survivor look at the pattern, what's been happening, not just this one moment. Because in my experience, I've noticed if somebody has physical abuse, then we can go back and do these assessments and be like, oh, but actually, this has been happening, the historical part of the domestic violence. And then we get to this point. So this wheel is used for education because not every person understands domestic violence. And it's a great tool to add to your toolbox. And Brooke and Chase, they're going to make sure that you guys have a copy of this wheel. Take it back to the office, make sure it's in a binder, wherever you keep your protocols, so that you can have that to be able to help your staff and your survivors understand domestic violence. So let's connect the dots between domestic violence and the perinatal health outcomes. Abuse doesn't just cause physical harm, right? It disrupts every system in the body. We know that chronic stress during pregnancy can alter immune function, hormone levels, and maternal fetal bonding, and the list probably goes on and on. Um, Our pregnant individuals, patient survivors, they may appear when they come to us disengaged or inconsistent, not because they don't care, but because they've been surviving, right? Without harm, without having a trauma lens, though, we, meaning our systems, our agencies, may punish our survivors for behaviors that are actually signs of distress or survival. So let's just look at a few of these. Let's look at the mental health impact due to domestic violence. Somebody comes into your office and maybe they are hypervigilant. You see they're very anxious. Maybe they're having panic attacks. All of these may stem from living in that constant state of threat, right? Depression, and emotional numbing, they can result from that prolonged exposure of abuse, isolation, or even that crazy making, that gaslighting. Um, Maybe there's self-harm. So when a survivor feels trapped, unsupported, or blamed, they may be suicidal. Maybe there's substance use. Survivors may use alcohol, opioids, or stimulants to manage pain, sleep disruption, emotional overwhelm. And even we find that some abusers encourage or sabotage the sobriety to increase control, right? Or to discredit the survivor. So, not taking anything at face value, I guess, is really the point here. You've got to be curious and try to see what is really happening with an individual. So, the physical impacts could be the increased risk of miscarriage, preterm labor, um, all of those things. So you have a patient that comes in and they confide to you that she went into preterm labor and admits that she missed several prenatal appointments. On your gentle inquiry, your questioning, she shares that her partner controls her transportation and she feels anxious all the time. This illustrates how all of these impacts, physical, emotional, behavioral impacts, they all overlap in domestic violence. It's not one dimensional. And in pregnancy, unfortunately, the fetus is not shielded from the abuse, even without direct physical harm. And this is not about blame, it's about understanding the full scope of harm and offering support to our pregnant individuals. We need to help them to understand what's happening. So, harm during pregnancy may result in stress for the fetus. The stress hormone cortisol is released by the survivor, and then that can impact fetal development. The stress and trauma associated with domestic violence can result in preterm birth, which poses health risks for the baby. And babies born to parents experiencing domestic violence are more likely to have lower birth weights, potentially leading to developmental delays and health issues throughout their whole entire life. And these impacts highlight the importance of addressing domestic violence early during pregnancy to protect the health and the well-being of both the mother and the fetus. Oh, look at this cutie. That baby makes me so happy. See, in this heavy work, you've got to take your moments, right? A cute baby is always the thing to bring up the mood. And we want to protect those babies. And as I mentioned earlier, pregnancy-related domestic violence includes pregnancy up to 1 year after birth. And infants are deeply impacted by the emotional climate around them, even if they're not directly harmed. Children in general are. They absorb stress through disruptive routines, caregiver dysregulation, environmental chaos, and early intervention matters. And follow-up support for the caregiver is vital because this is for up to a year, right? So there are developmental and relational consequences. Maybe they're not able to bond, feeding and sleep difficulties, hot and startled response or irritability, delays in motor or language development, difficulties soothing or bonding. So even whenever somebody comes in with their child, be paying attention to those things as well. So now that we are aware of the tactics and the impact of domestic violence, We've listened to our pregnant individuals, what they have to tell us. We're going to talk about putting some action behind it, right? We're going to talk about those assessments. When we are assessing or screening for domestic violence, we're not just asking questions, we're creating space for safety for that person. Screening for domestic violence isn't about ticking a box, it's about building trust. Survivors disclose when they feel seen, not when they're pressured or judged. And there it says screening matters. So, to screen or not to screen, that's the big question, right? And guess what? There's lots of controversy around this subject. I can't believe it. We can't agree to say it ain't so, but it is. Some individuals, particularly here in the United States, advocate that all women consulting care providers should screen every woman for domestic violence. And this is referred to as universal screening or routine inquiry, while others argue the case for a more selective approach on the basis of clinical and diagnostic considerations. So, how they present a case finding. In general, um, studies have shown that screening for domestic violence, everyone systemically asking all women about violence, it does increase the identification of women experiencing domestic violence, but it has not shown to really reduce um, domestic violence. So, in other words, universal screening catches more cases, but it doesn't always improve the outcome. Clinical inquiry, waiting for those findings, may feel safer for survivors, but it risks missing those who don't show obvious signs. The key is to have a plan, right, for thoughtful integration of an assessment screening program from disclosure to follow up. Whether your organization chooses to screen everyone, that universal screening, or if they only want to wait until they have a clinical reason to ask. A screening program should feel like a warm invitation, right? Not an interrogation. We're there to create safety. Survivors can sense whenever we're rushing or we're disconnected from them. We have to work to build a system that honors their dignity and avoids, again, that check it off, that tick box culture, right? Just check, check, check. So whenever I say tick box culture, it might look like a pregnant survivor attends her appointment and the provider hands her a screening, a form with yes or no answers, right? Have you ever been hit? No. Do you feel safe at home? Has anyone ever restricted your freedom? But guess what? She's answering no to most of those questions because her partner hasn't physically hit her. He controls her transportation and isolates her, um, but not the physical that she's thinking about. So what happens? The provider, seeing mostly no boxes that are checked on the form, concludes there's no domestic violence, and he moves on. So we have to shift from compliance to connection. Screening tools should be paired with that gentle inquiry, right? That gentle questioning. Um, so that shift in your mindset, that's the thing that we have to keep. Sorry, and I lost my place. We have to keep the open mind and be gentle. So we're going to start with ensuring privacy and safety, right? Consistency. We're going to use survivor-centered language. We're going to train our staff in that trauma-informed questioning. Those are things that are going to need to be included in our protocols for screening. So I think that we do have to decide the big question. Are we going to screen every woman or are we going to wait for clinical signs? So if you're looking for clinical signs, they're going to open that door, right, for further exploration, whether it's for medication suggestions or other treatments or referrals. That's a lot of times what we look for. But now that we're looking through that lens of domestic violence, we're going to keep in mind that these symptoms may not just reflect a condition, but they may reflect trauma. That's the mind shift, especially whenever we see repeated or unexplained issues, or say an overbearing partner comes in. then it's time to gently explore safety with this individual. So we might be looking for depression, anxiety, like we talked about, self-harm, substance use. Yeah, okay, they're clinical. We need to address those things. But what is the why underneath it? What's really going on? So just getting that domestic violence lens whenever you're meeting with your individuals. So let's talk about screening tools. Screening tools are tools, just that. They are for exploring safety by using an assessment, right, for domestic violence. But they are just tools and they are helpful, but they're not magic. We're going to use them as guides and not replacements for empathy. And we have to keep in mind as well that they don't capture the whole picture. We have to pair these tools with that questioning that we talked about earlier. So some of the ones that I found that were validated, one is HARK. So that stands for humiliation, afraid, rape, kick. And it's a 4-question screening tool that covers humiliation, fear, sexual assault, and physical violence. So it's quick and easy to administer. It captures both emotional and physical abuse. However, does have a limitation, right? It's focused on past experiences and it may miss that coercive control element. And also, it's just a yes and no answer. So it can underrepresent the severity of what is actually going on. And you have to find which one of these tools is going to work for your agency. So then there's HITS, which is hurt, insult, threaten, scream. It measures frequency of abuse. It's 4 items that they use, and it's based on a scale of 1 to 5 for frequency. So it does include the frequency and severity. It's easy to integrate into medical settings, but it does have a limitation of missing, again, that subtle coercion. And also, we know survivors may minimize frequency of the abuse as well as the abuse. So then there's the PVS, which is Partner Violence Screen. It's a quick 3-question tool for healthcare settings. It's extremely brief. It's very useful in a busy clinic, I would think, and it's been validated in prenatal care settings. But it does have a very narrow scope. It may miss emotional abuse or coercive control again, and it relies heavily on survivor disclosure. So then there is WAST, Women Abuse Screening Tool. It explores the relationship dynamics and emotional abuse. It's 8 questions. It goes beyond physical violence to assess for the emotional climate. It's useful for identifying patterns of control and intimidation. So again, though, it's 8 questions, right? It's longer than the other tools, so it might be harder to use in a fast-paced setting. And it also requires provider skill and interpretation, right? That curiosity and more of that gentle inquiry, the asking of the open-ended questions, trying to figure out the why beneath everything. And then there is the danger assessment. This is the one that we use in our work as a child welfare domestic violence liaison. And it's evidence-based predictor of lethality. It's got 20 questions and it focuses on homicide risk, but not the broader DV dynamics. We actually have another assessment that we also do to touch on that coercive control. So to kind of sum it up, the short screens are the PVS, the HARK, and the HITS. They're best for quick identification in healthcare or prenatal settings. The deeper tools are the WAST, the danger assessment. They're best for maybe DV advocacy or counseling or whenever you suspect great risk. But the important thing here is that you have a way to assess and that it's included in your best practice protocols. So all this talk about trauma-informed gentle inquiry, right? what does that really look like? How do we really do that day to day? We are going to watch a video here in just a minute to see it in action, but I wanted us to have a minute to talk about it. So we're going to start our interactions with felt safety, and that is my favorite word in the world. I need so much felt safety in my life and everything. But survivors need that sense that you're safe, that you're curious, that you're non-judgmental, that the space itself is safe. This might mean like you ensure that you have the opportunity to speak to that survivor alone. So we need to have a plan for that for all of our clients. We're going to use a calm tone, a non-threatening body language, and then we're going to be culturally sensitive. We might even open our conversation with our introduction. Hey, Maria, my name is Becky. Because pregnancy can be such a stressful time, we ask everyone about safety and relationships. This helps us support both you and your baby. You just have to find your flow, but that's, one way that you might be able to start off your conversation. We are going to empower choice, though. We're going to remind the client, the person, that she can decline to answer or share only what she feels safe. I always say to my folks, it's your story. Feel free to share with me as much or as little as you are comfortable sharing with me. We also want to normalize our questioning. We ask all families. We know that violence can occur to pregnant women, and we're going to ask gently, are you okay if I ask you some of these questions? So, a best practice inquiry framework is using a layered approach, right? You start with that broad question and then you can narrow it down if a disclosure occurs. You might start out just asking about general well being. How are things at home for you right now? Then that might lead into you being able to ask, do you ever feel afraid of your partner or controlled in ways that make it hard to care for yourself? Maybe you're able to then ask about behavioral control. Has anyone ever kept you from your appointments or transportation or making decisions about your health? You can just layer it on. And then if there is a disclosure through this line of questioning or from your assessment, we want to offer them again choices. Offer information or ask if they would like to speak with someone today, such as a domestic violence advocate or a caseworker, or whoever that you have in your agency that is going to handle those types of things. Disclosure is a gift of trust, and our role is to respond with safety and belief. So I am just wondering, which of these questions feels natural to you? Does it feel natural to ask? So in last night in domestic violence group, it just made me think of this too. We talked about we get to ask questions, right? We're human beings. So, but some of my individuals were not comfortable. They didn't want to have confrontation. That was some of the things that came out. So we talked about being assertive versus aggressive. But anyways, my point is that we talked about practicing asking questions, and we should practice asking these questions to your individuals, especially if you feel uncomfortable or have some kind of bias around asking. All right, are we ready? We're going to watch this trauma-informed inquiry in action. And I want us to be thinking about what red flags that you might see in this scenario, because we're going to talk about those. And then we're going to talk about if that person at your agency, if they disclose harm, what are your next steps in your response?
Now, Katie, as part of our initial assessment, we ask all women the same questions about family and domestic
Oh, sorry, guys. That was me.
violence. We know that violence in the home can occur to pregnant women and sometimes for the first time in their relationships. Are you okay if I ask you some of these questions?
Yeah, sure.
Just so you know that what we do discuss today is confidential. We will be recording it in your personal medical record. However, if I'm concerned about the safety of you or your baby, then I may need to contact an external service. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So Katie, has anyone in your family or close to you ever put you down, humiliated, embarrassed, tried to control what you say or do?
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you mean, but Mark likes to know where I am all the time. He doesn't do it to be mean, he's very protective of me. He cares a lot for me and the baby. If I ask him, he lets me go out. It's no big deal. He doesn't do it to be mean.
Okay.
And, well, I've been really tired lately and doing stupid things. And Mark gets really angry. I know it's part of pregnancy, but Mark gets really angry and calls me useless and stuff. I don't know how I'm going to be as a mum. Useless, probably. I'm just so tired all the time and unmotivated, and the baby's not even here yet. I don't know what I'm going to do when the baby finally comes. Yeah, it's just all a bit overwhelming sometimes.
Pregnancy can be a really stressful time for everyone. Katie, can I ask you, what do you mean by that Mark lets you go out if you ask him?
Oh, just normal stuff, like if I want to go to the shops or go to appointments like this. Yeah, just normal stuff, really. He just cares about me, so he needs to know where I am all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Has Mark ever hurt you or threatened to hurt you?
He's never actually hit me, but he can get a little bit rough when he gets angry.
Katie, what do you mean by when you say Mark gets a bit rough? Can you give me an example?
Well, he likes to throw things around when he gets angry, and he did push me the other day, but it wasn't that bad. He does throw things at me, and lately he's been calling me a selfish bitch a lot. He's just under so much pressure with work. He's a policeman, so yeah, his job's really stressful. The pressure as well of me not working. Mark thought it would be best if I stopped working. He's very protective of me. And that pressure, I think he's getting pretty freaked out about it all and the baby, especially considering it wasn't planned, and he's got another 2 kids as well with his ex. I think he's getting depressed. He's being very paranoid as well. He accused me of having an affair the other day, which is ridiculous. And he's been checking my phone a lot and my email, and he has to know where I am and what I'm doing all the time. But I know it's just because he cares about me, so it's fine, it's normal.
Katie, these behaviours don't sound normal to me. Abuse can take shape in many different forms. It doesn't have to be physical violence. Sometimes these behaviours can also escalate during the pregnancy and continue after the baby is born. Katie, I'm quite concerned about some of the behaviours you're describing that Mark is doing, like controlling things and taking your phone. That sounds quite abusive to me. I do have some information that I can give you today, and I can also get in touch with one of our social workers. Would you like me to do that?
I don't have time because I told Mark I'd be home by 12, but maybe another time. Would
Sure.
Mark have to know that I'm doing this?
No, that can be confidential. We don't have to do anything today. We can talk to one of the social workers at our next appointment. I can also give you a booklet that you can take with you today. You don't have to take it home. You can read it in the waiting room. It's about finding help, and there's lots of information for women in there. There is the domestic violence phone line. It's a confidential phone number that you can speak to somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay, thank you.
Katie, I really appreciate your honesty today. I am concerned for the safety of yourself and your baby. Do you think that you're safe to go home today?
Yeah.
Okay. If you would like to make an extra antenatal appointment to see someone, then please feel free to do so. Okay?
Thank you.
Oh, guys, I'm so worried about her. I hope you all did too. I just kept feeling so bad. I just wanted to be there in that moment. So what red flags did you guys see in this scenario? And if we were to look at our wheel of power and control, we would recognize that there was emotional abuse, isolation, um, using privilege, economic abuse, and just like was mentioned earlier, the not wanting her to work, right? Um, Intimidation. And if we were using only an assessment for some of these things, they might have been missed. So another thing that I thought of as well was her feeling unmotivated and tired. Hmm. So that made me think, okay, if somebody comes into the clinic and they say those types of things, we might just think, well, is she depressed? And you know what? I would be depressed too, if Mark were doing all of these things to me. So another thing, though, that I felt was important in that was that uh, Maria was minimizing her abuse, right? We talked about that earlier. Sometimes they might minimize frequency or the abuse itself. She said he does it because he cares. He's being protective. What a perfect time for you guys on the front lines as a provider to listen and to listen without judgment, give reassurance, safety, and to offer help.
We have a few things in the chat, Becky. You've already mentioned a lot of them, but we have controlling, not letting her work, excuses her partner, controlling, access to weapon, downplaying the behavior, financial control, must know where she is at all times. And yeah, and Carla says she was nervous talking about it. Yeah. And pushing her is physical. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. See, you guys are so smart already. You don't even need me here, but I am here as a reminder. So, see, that's perfect. Yes, you guys know you're listening for the language of abuse, right? So, you know what you're looking for. I love it. Very, very good. Very good. So, I think we're in agreement that she has just disclosed harm, right? So, then what are our next steps in our response? So this is just a sample response chart that your organization might could create. Maria comes in for her initial visit, then the patient presents for her prenatal care, whatever other services that you're providing, whether it is picking up diapers or whatever, you have this disclosure. So you're observing for red flags, whether it's through the trauma-informed inquiry or your assessments, or you're looking at clinical signs, whatever. You know, with this individual, there weren't any clinical signs, right? Well, I mean, she did have, well, I don't know. Did she have missed appointments? I can't remember. Anyways, missed appointments. The partner insists on being present. Like you said, the patient appears withdrawn or they're anxious. Yes, you guys picked up on that. Maybe there's the physical indicators. Maybe there's bruises. So we're going to create that safe space, right? Like we said earlier, maybe we say to them, we check in privately with all patients. Can we speak to you for just a moment? It's important to have a plan, especially if their partner is insistent on being present for everything. So then we're going to do our screening. We're going to use that trauma-informed language. We're going to normalize. We're going to offer choices. And then if there's not a disclosure, then we continue with care, right? And we just remain observant. And I think that's something too. This time there might not be anything, but next time there might. If there is that disclosure, we are going to validate and support. You're not alone. This isn't your fault. Thank you for trusting me. Then we're going to assess for immediate safety. Is it safe for this person to return home? Are there urgent medical needs or emotional needs that need to be addressed? And then we're going to safety plan and make referrals where they're needed. And we're going to offer options, right? Not directives, not telling a person what they need to do. We can offer them a DV advocate, some mental health support. Maybe they need shelter or housing. And we're always going to give a warm handoff if possible. We're going to call the advocate or introduce them to the social worker and provide discrete contact information as well. So we're going to create a protocol, flow chart, however your agency wants to do that, that's going to follow internal guidelines for reporting, documenting, and follow-up. So then we're going to do safety planning with that individual. Again, options, not directives. Whenever we talk about safety planning in just a minute, we're going to note we always include the survivor, right? It needs to be survivor-led. And then we're going to document the abuse, and we're going to document it factually. We're going to avoid labels, like abused. We're going to note our observations and our patient statements. And put your patient statements down like they tell you, exactly like they tell you. So I didn't put step 5 on this chart, but it would be follow up and collaboration, right? Coordinate care, whether it's with the domestic violence service, whether it's with the mental health individuals, then continue that trauma informed support. We're going to respect their autonomy, avoid traumatizing them again. We're going to monitor for ongoing safety concerns. And you guys are with individuals for a long time, so you're going to be able to be very successful at this. So this work, it starts with us reflecting on our own discomfort and biases that we might have. That helps us to show up with clarity and compassion, right? Remembering that screening isn't just a skill, it's a mindset. So I do want us to take just a moment and just reflect, what biases or fears do you bring to the screening process? Is it that you worry about offending clients or making them feel uncomfortable? Um, and honestly, that just, so like I do this every day, right? I might have gotten over that, but I can see where it would be uncomfortable if you weren't doing this every day to ask those things. Sometimes, do I assume that domestic violence only looks like the physical injury, and then I'm overlooking coercive control? Do I fear that asking about violence will open up a conversation that I'm not equipped to manage? That's a real fear. I don't know what to do, but that's why we're here, right? To be prepared. We will know what to do. So if you guys feel led to put any bias or fear that you might have in the chat, and then we can talk about that in the end, that would be great. Well, maybe you're asking, how do I create felt safety in my consultations, right? You can ensure privacy by asking the partner or the family to step out, but honestly, you might get confrontation there too. So you've got to have a plan for how to handle that. That's where all that training comes in. Whenever that partner says, well, I want to be included in everything that's happening, you've got to have a way to be able to say, well, we meet with every person privately first. Always using that calm tone, right? And open body language, reassuring the client that these questions are routine for everyone. Maybe you're going to remind your client that they can choose what they share and that you're going to respect their autonomy. And then be thinking about, what does the trauma-informed questioning look like in your role specifically? Maybe it's that you are the person that gets to ask open-ended questions, right? That invites that person to tell you their story, not just those yes or no answers. You can validate disclosures with compassion. Maybe you balance clinical care with advocacy, connecting clients to resources while centering their choices, right? Like what do they need themselves? And that can be for every person, the person that sits out front, the person that's doing the exam, everybody. So just be thinking about what's one concrete step that you're going to take to shift your practice whenever you go back. So the last key response that may be the most important, from my view, is safety planning. So it isn't just a clinical tool, it's a human one. It's how we are going to show up for those clients in moments of their greatest fear, right? There might be uncertainty and transition. This pregnancy is a time of transition and uncertainty and fear. But then you add in that domestic violence element, and it's much elevated. So we're going to look a little bit deeper at what we should be planning for safety for these individuals, meeting our survivors where they're at. And you don't need a degree or to be a domestic violence advocate to safety plan with an individual. There are lots of safety plans that you can print on the internet. There are apps that you can download on your phone. So the times are changing. Everybody has access to everything. The most important thing, though, to remember is that any safety planning should be survivor driven. This is their life. They know their abuser better than any person, and they know what has worked for them in the past and what is going to work for them in the future. So we need to be able to support their decisions, whether that is to stay or go, and we got to make a plan around it. We can safety plan. For all kinds of things. We can safety plan for a violent incident, for example, by helping that survivor think through things like where's a safe place in your home if you feel that there's going to be an incident, where should I go? And it's not the kitchen, right? Because that's where the weapons are. There could be knives. So trying to help them think through that is a great idea. We can safety plan if they intend on staying in the abusive environment, help them plan a quick exit strategy or plan for child safety. Those are all things that, as a child welfare domestic violence liaison, that I'm going to plan for, but it's also something that you can address in the clinical setting. So here are some suggestions for planning for leaving. I tell you, one of the greatest tips that I got from an advocate that's been in this work for a long time, she said that she would tell folks, get a black garbage bag and put your belongings in it and set it out by the trash, but you know which one is yours so that it's not suspected. You know, if you're having a plan to leave like the next morning, then you can go out and grab it and you got your stuff all together. So in my backpack, when I go to work, I keep a black garbage bag in there because you never know when you're going to help somebody plan for leaving. And then here are questions that we can ask if we're planning for safety after birth. Does that individual feel safe taking the baby home? Are there concerns about your partner's behavior? Can you identify safe caregivers or a backup plan? Do you have the phone number to the domestic violence shelter if something goes horribly wrong? And I want to kind of go back to that step 5 on our response chart, which was follow up and collaboration. No one provider can do this work alone, right? We're one brick in a whole entire wall. That's why we need those warm handoffs that we talked about and coordinated care. And that care matters, whether it's with care passing them to a DV advocate or a social worker or a mental health provider. Our goal is to build a net of support around our pregnant individuals. And we can do this with collaborative partnerships. So within the community, and this is often the missing link to providing great care. Community partners can provide that low barrier, culturally relevant support, right? That feels safer and more accessible. So that is one reason why the Department of Children's Services brought in liaisons, because we can offer that to our families, whereas they could not. So we have this collaboration. Maybe it is healthcare providers plus the DV agency. Maybe we may get together and we make joint protocols for strangulation, or if you have somebody that has preterm labor and then they disclose. So maybe we can work together to provide services. Maybe it's faith groups within your community or other nonprofits or peer support networks that you get involved with or law enforcement. whenever the survivor consents. They can help with things like, even safety planning, making some extra drives around the neighborhood, all of those things. So, community connection is the actual weaving of that safety net, right? That survivors can access. Clients may not be ready to leave. They may not be ready to disclose or even name what is happening to them as abuse, but we can still offer pathways and resources. Like our nurse in the video said, whether it's a hotline number that you tuck into a diaper bag, a warm handoff to that DV advocate, or just even a quiet moment to talk about contraception or whatever. It's these small acts that can be lifelines, and they should be included in whatever screening program and domestic violence response protocols that your agency develops. So, guys, we've talked a lot about supporting survivors, right? But as we end, I wanted to take just a minute to talk about supporting ourselves. This work is very powerful, but it's also very heavy. And trauma just doesn't impact our survivors, it can ripple into us as providers, right? So we have to think about the signals that our bodies, our minds, give when we're carrying too much and have a plan a practice put in place. This self-care isn't about being indulgent. It is truly and really about professional care, and it prevents that burnout. Maybe it might be grounding, right? Like breathing exercises or a body scan, a nature connection, the sun. We have this place outside my office that the sun, no matter how cold it is outside, that place is like fire. It is, the sun is on it, and I love to just go out there. And if something difficult has just happened, go out there and let the sun hit my face for just a minute. So maybe you have creative rituals. Maybe you're journaling or art or music or storytelling circle. Maybe you're meeting together with your supervision and your peers, and you guys are talking about some of these things. It's very important to have structured support within your agency to reflect on these difficult cases. And just keeping all of your hygiene, your nutrition, all of those things in place. And one thing that I thought of was for me, so I'm Appalachian, right? And food and music are very important. So if I can listen to some music and I can eat some cornbread and turnip greens, this girl is good to go for a few days, anyways. So just taking care to restore yourself. But we have to have a plan, just like we're doing that plan to help our survivors that come into our agencies. We also have to have a plan to protect ourselves and to help ourselves because our presence matters. It matters to others. So if you guys don't hear anything at all but this, you don't have to be a domestic violence expert to make a difference. You just have to be safe, consistent, and willing to listen, right? Trauma-informed care is about creating space for healing, even in those small everyday interactions that you guys have with our individuals. So, as we close, I want to invite you guys just to reflect. What's one thing you're going to do different after today? Whether it's changing your language, adjusting your screening process, creating a screening process, or reaching out to a community partner. Every shift in our work really does matter and makes a difference. And together we can create those safer spaces for pregnant survivors and their families. Okay, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. Thank you guys for everything. Do we have any questions? Anything that we want to talk about deeper?
Actually, I did have a question, Becky, that maybe you may be able to answer, but it may be more specific to what kind of work they're doing. Whenever we talk about documenting maybe a disclosure or something like that, what is the best way that they can keep that information safe? Because let's say like things do get subpoenaed at court or things like that, Becky, what's best practice for documenting this like difficult subject?
So in domestic violence, and hey, I tell you what, y'all, we're lucky too that Daryl's in here because she's the wealth of information on domestic violence. But I would say that best practice is one, To the best of your ability, don't be putting things like addresses in there. Keeping things very factual. If you can keep names out, that's awesome. Just trying to protect that person's identity as confidential as you can. I mean, I know if it's going to court, of course, everybody's going to be there, but those are just some of the things that come to my mind. But does anybody else have a suggestion? Have you faced this in your agency?
I mean, Becky, I think that's right. I think you want to be, again, using in your notes about participants in your program, using those unique identifiers instead of their name, avoiding naming them in actual notes, right? Refer to them as the program participant. I mean, these are things that in a DV agency, because they are ultra sensitive to that they do as a matter of course, they're trained on that. In those of you who have a medical component are also very sensitive to, how much information you are putting in notes that are likely to be subpoenaed, right? In order to protect the rights of patients or clients that you have. So if they are receiving counseling services and the person is a licensed counselor in Tennessee, that information is privileged, right? So that's already protected. If they are working, if you refer them to a local DV agency, that's not privileged, but it's considered confidential. And as I said, most DV agencies have been trained on how to document so that if records are subpoenaed, they're not making statements like this person has, this person appears to be schizophrenic. If you're not a licensed mental health professional, you shouldn't be diagnosing people. You're just documenting what you see, right? Maybe what they say, but not necessarily your opinion about what's wrong with them, unless you are a licensed professional and able to make such an opinion. But to the extent possible, keep in mind for anyone you see, whether you suspect they're a victim of domestic violence or not, be protective of the documentation you keep about people. They are trusting you with sometimes very personal information, and you should do what you can to protect the person. And think about it this way: I'm not going to write whether here at SWARPS in our direct service programs, or when I was at RAP, or when I was with Children's Services. We're not going to write anything about you that we would not share with you.
Yes, I agree with that. I even tell my people, is it okay if I take notes and you can read these whenever we get through if you'd like to? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Doral. Yeah, that's very good. Protecting their confidentiality.
And a very good question here. Any suggestions for survivors for materials in Spanish? I know that many DV agencies have materials in Spanish. Becky, I don't know if your agency does. And then suggestions for survivors that come from cultures where, yeah, they don't tend to feel comfortable talking about the subject. Becky, have you had experience with that? And sort of how do you handle that?
Sure. So, well, I'll touch on the one thing. I do know that the strangulation sheets, I can get those in Spanish and I will work on the others. I think that it all does come to one, an individual is going to know if you are there with them. So whenever it's someone that is from a culture that doesn't tend to want to talk about these things, patience, and it is their story. And like you have to make that connection. That's what the whole thing is about, right? Is having that connection with that person and then letting them share whenever they're ready. Um, but as far as there are some agencies, and it's very few and it's very limited, you have to really search in Tennessee to find agencies that might be, like have bilingual advocates or something like that, that can help. But they're out there. And if that individual would like to reach out to me, I can try to find you some of the resources that we have in our area. It's much needed everywhere, all across Tennessee, I think, to have advocates from different cultures to be able to help. Chattanooga has an agency that is for Hispanic and Spanish individuals. I'm thinking maybe Nashville does. So it's going to take, just trying to find those resources. And if you do have a population that's big, those are things that your agency needs to include in their protocols and their best practice, or those resources and links to those agencies.
One last little thing just for everyone. The Tennessee Coalition for Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And again, Brooke and Chase will send this out in terms of resources. But just so you know, Tennessee Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence has a lot of information on their website as well, much of which will be a benefit to you since you are all across the state. And a call to them will they're able to provide you with resources in Spanish and any other languages that might be available.
All right. Thank you. You all have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.